Someone told me a story that they were by one of these like Jewish studies, old Jewish studies professors, from Deutschland. And the first shir was like, okay, this is going to be a class, how do you call it, a course in Gemara. First shir is like, okay, I'm giving you notes, homework, you should read like 70 blad Gemara. And the first shir, a bunch of people came, like a bunch of girls and boys and stuff. And the guy thought never that he's supposed to read 70 blad Gemara. So he's trying. Not going anywhere. So he came back in the next class, he told the professor, this is not possible. So he said he passed the test. Now you could come. Don't worry, you're not supposed to learn it. And this person was complaining that this is gatekeeping. Because all the people that didn't count, that you're not meant to do it, they never didn't come back the second time. They were like, okay, this is not for me, it's way too beyond my level. But Lamaße, again is gerecht, but if you want, you have to. Like nowadays we have professors of literatures that they only read like the Cliff Notes. And to really do anything seriously, you have to do a huge amount of work. Like this. I know someone told me, like, what do you need to know to be a professor in Talmud and certain universities? You have to read like 30 blad Gemara. Just be clear, it's a big accomplishment to read 30 blad Gemara. But that's Amuritz, right? Yeah. Really, you have to, in order, like the basic, you have to like 700 blad to be a shtickle Yedei Talmud. But that would take you 20 years to figure out, to get through. So people don't do it. And same as the stuff that we're learning is even worse. I was thinking about this today. So we're studying the Shemona Prerequesits, which is like these 8 little chapters that the Ram wrote. They're entirely, I don't know, it's a small booklet, right? How many words is in the whole thing?
No.
Like 5,000 words, the whole book, or something like that. A little more? 10,000. I don't know, I didn't count. You could count. Don't ask ChatGPT, because one thing he doesn't know how to do is count. But you could count. And what is it? It's very important to realize this, because I'm struggling with this in my class. It's the Rambam trying to teach people who are very limited, right? He's talking to Yidden, man. He doesn't say this ever, that he's talking to people that are pretty dumb and they need to be taught things that really are very basic. And like some of his friends say this. Rabbi, I told you this drusha already? Rabbi, if you read in this book, let you see, Rabbi Shmuel ben Tibban, who was the translator of the Rambam, he read the Rambam like this. And this is how he understood the Rambam in general. It's also how he understood his own job. The Rambam did not understand his job correctly, although this is a limitation that you have to realize exists. So, oh gosh, I should make you work, people. Rabbi, it says over here, I'll show you, okay? He wrote Akdumah. The Rabbi Shmuel ben Tibban translated, one of the big things that he translated was the Shemona Prerequesits. Like after he translated Moreh Nevuchim, he translated also the Shemona Prerequesits. And he wrote this, page 12. It says, Mipnai. See, it says, Tam Shechib Rava Prerequesits.
Yeah.
Mipnai, if you give me a drink of this, right? Okay. Mipnai Shechach Me'amechka. No, okay.
Oh.
No, ich glaube, ich weiß es klar. Okay. Mipnai Shechach Me'amechka Chibra B'Sforim B'Midei Sa'odam. Ve'arichu Lecha B'Bem. So Chacham Mechker is this word Mechker for philosophers is a word that he invented, or his friends. Chakira, you've heard of Chakira? The word Chakira or Mechker means philosophy, and you know how it translates to in English, Mechker, Chakira. Investigation. Weird translation. Give me a nicer one.
Research.
Inquiry. Right?
I'm saying the Hebrew word is researcher, right? Choker.
Nowadays, Choker means someone that doesn't learn anything. No.
He researches instead.
Yeah, research sounds like the wrong thing. Inquire is a better word. Better term.
Chakira, we mean a distinction, right? Like
in Yeshivish language, Chakira. In Yeshivish language, Chakira means
what's the word?
Like a division. What the Aristotelians used to call a division. Like that something can be either like this or like that.
Right, but in a way that divides two things in a distinctive way. They oppose each other.
But originally, Mechker was a translation for philosophers, and it should mean something like inquiry. because the distinctive thing of philosophy or mechker, which everyone hates, it's exactly why they hate it, and it's also exactly why you should love it, is that it's a tradition that doesn't know. Very important, right? That knows how to act without answers, or not starting with the answers at least, right? Starting with the questions. There's a lot of things. You don't know this Drush already? You know this one already. This is the thing that we're trying to do in our Shirim. Because he doesn't entirely understand it that way though, Rabbi Ibn Tiban, but that's the truth. There's all these traditions of wisdom, of knowledge, of Torah, of all kinds of cults, of Chassidus, Musar, and all kinds of things. And in general, or science, I don't know, whatever you learn. In general, the way many of these, these things are taught and studied is in the language of answers. It's like, maybe you're supposed to have a question because otherwise you don't go, but probably you don't even say that. Or people say things like you were looking to the direction or something, but even that you don't say. But what we have is like this, as there's a bunch of opinions. Some of them are opinions, some of them are like fact that were already discovered. And this is what you get, you learn. This is what you get taught. Because someone would say, if you don't know something, how could you teach anything, right? You have to teach things that you already know. So although every human being has some things that they don't know, and even within the things that they claim to know, there's for sure things that they don't know. But if you go to yeshiva, the first thing, or go to Ashkufa Shir, the first thing is you hear everything the guy knows. If you work very hard, you figure out where the question marks still are. But he doesn't ever say, look, this is what I don't know, this is how we might start working on solving it or making some progress and so on. That's not what they do. That's how most religious traditions for sure work that way. They're called dogmatic traditions. They all know things, and they try to convince you of it sometimes. That's the most they'll do in the relation to questioning, or it might be open to questions. And usually when someone says they're open to questions, they mean to say they really want to convince you. You know the difference between the Magachi that's open to questions and the one that's not? That the one that's not open to questions doesn't really want to convince you. One reason he's happy if you're like, this is what we believe in. The one that says, no, we're open-minded, he means to say, I really want you to believe it. So tell me your questions, and I'll make sure that you know that your questions were wrong. Right? He doesn't mean to say that he's going to change his mind. Doesn't mean to say that he doesn't know something. Right? It's very different. Now, so that's all traditions that are not mechker, not traditions of inquiry. Okay, the big chiddush that Rabbi Socrates came up with, one of his biggest chiddushim, and it's very hard to understand, is that there could be such a thing as a tradition of questioning, not a tradition of answers. He didn't go around teaching people, maybe he did, but at least didn't say, that he didn't go around teaching people saying that he figured out the answer, this is what you're supposed to be doing, this is what you're supposed to be thinking, this is how the world is, and I just need looking for people to buy it, or to convince them to buy it, or to act in the way according to my political program and so on. What he went around saying was that he has a bunch of questions. That's why he's going to say he doesn't know anything. Doesn't mean he doesn't know anything and he's just, okay, I'm just happy with that. It means to say he has questions, right? That's why the word ignorance is also something, sometimes people use ignorance also as a way of stopping to ask questions. Okay, we don't know. That's why the word inquiry is a more stronger word than not knowing, than ignorance, like Socratic ignorance. Socratic ignorance doesn't mean not knowing. It means being
dissatisfied with the answers.
No, it means being courageous enough to ask the questions. Courageous in the sense that it's almost impossible, but we're not giving that drusha here. But somehow being able to stand with a question and believing that it will lead you somewhere, not staying. You don't want to be stuck there. He wants to learn something. He wants to make it become clear. But he is able to make a whole conversation or a whole sheet which is framed as a question, is not framed as an answer. And then there's in some sense, people talk about a tradition, like the Western philosophical tradition and the scientific tradition is the Socrates tradition, but it's only a tradition in the sense that it's not a tradition in the sense of this is the set of beliefs that they have and that they try to give over to make everyone believe. what distinguishes that from that kind of tradition is that it's more of a set of questions that we have, or a set of, well, no, questions are also something. It's a set of way of framing the questions, or kind of questions.
And a lot of times when he's asking the questions, he's always trying to prove his point, like by his questions.
No.
Also, then therefore,
Yeah, if you have patience to stay with a question, you'll find out a lot of things. Turns out. But it's not a way that it's very different from a debate, right? Debates are when I'm trying to win. The questions are when I'm trying to learn.
Yeah. No, but I'm saying always asking a question.
Most quasi-philosophical conversations end with frustration, right? The person just says, how do you think about these things all the time? Goodbye. Right?
Right, but
because you have to
let's
sit
say
there and explore the question, and
right.
the person tells you something, and you're like, well, okay, let's say that's true. What about this? Like, what are we going to do about that? And they go, oh, we'll do this, and ding. And
okay,
go,
but there always comes some sort of conclusion.
No, exactly the opposite. No conversation that I had just discussing a philosophical idea with anybody ever ended with, oh, we got the answer.
No. Now we got the answer. More like, oh, we're stuck here. So what do you think? What do you think?
Right. Usually the person goes, I don't know. Could we change the topic? You never had that happen? Person's like, I don't know. I can't snitch.
That's a failure of like being honest. No.
It's not a failure of being honest.
It's a failure of endurance. It's like, can you just like let the question sit on you and not throw it off in like a frustrated fit, right? Can you sit here and be like, okay, think about it. Like, you have a 2-hour car ride. Can you actually break your brain on it?
Yeah, but then at the end, you're supposed to get to somewhere. You either be convinced of the other position.
Usually the place that you get to, if you really did it for the full 2-hour car ride, is a better question.
Okay, let's move on.
Best questions now.
Yeah, there's a lot of progress to be made, but there's not a step to the questioning. The question is not something we're trying to get rid of, and that's why we do think that doing this kind of questioning helps you. But this is not. And I went way too far. We're not supposed to be getting all the way here, but we don't believe that this is. What did I say? We do believe that it helps you, that it's a good thing to do. Well, that's what Socrates believes, at least. But we don't think that it's a problem to have questions. That's the important thing. Let's just say this. It's the important belief of all philosophers that it's nothing. That's not a problem. A question and a problem are two different things. Problems are things that we solve. Questions are things that start us on an inquiry. That's the big difference. And for example, this is something that I read in. If you could close the door, that would be nice. If this is something that I read in somewhere, how a big thing that also some analytic philosophers, and especially science, when they pretend to talk about philosophical questions, is they try to make every question into a problem. Problems could be solved, and if you frame it into a problem, then it can be solved. But that's another whole.
The problem is also something that has the problem describes the method and the solution, right?
I don't know what that means.
Meaning, with a question, sometimes you don't even know how you get to the answer, right? Or what an answer to this question.
Question is when you really don't know something. A problem is when you do know something, you're just trying to solve a certain problem. But I'm not gonna get into examples and stuff. We're gonna get stuck here. But just the important nafkamina is that it's not a problem. Like for example, and I'm not gonna talk about science now and stuff. We're gonna get stuck. But the example for our purposes is, again, comparing that's why I just got into this discussion for this word Chachmei HaMechker, which is not what I'm supposed to be doing. Aber Chachmei HaMechker are the people, and then like relative, and this is important, relative to like when you have like religious societies and religious traditions. What we generally what we generally talk about is religious traditions of certain beliefs, certain opinions. They see questions as a problem, all of them. They could say it's a problem in the sense of it's a challenge to what we believe in and the way we want to organize our life. Whatever it is, even the people that are open to questions, they want to solve those problems. They're not happy that they have the question, right? That's the difference. If you're doing apologetics, they're still seeing questions as a problem. You just want to solve the problem. That's very nice. You want to solve the problems, or you're such a mom and you believe that you could solve all the problems. But the Mechker tradition doesn't see questions as a problem. There's not like there's something wrong, it's the opposite, it's a good thing. Like the cliche way, it's an opportunity. But it's not an opportunity to solve a new problem. It's an opportunity to do a different kind of thing, which is called questioning. And they actually created something like a tradition of questions more than a tradition of answers. That's the sense in which there's like really unity between all the people that are happy with having questions forever. Even if they have like very different, you could say different opinions, but in some sense they have the same questions. And these opinions are just ways of working out the question or making progress within the question. That's why also there's ideally there's always progress to be made. It's not like we've solved. People want say that philosophy doesn't solve things. It was not meant to solve things. It was meant to make things problematic. It was made to question things, not to open things, not to close things, right? So it's supposed to never solve itself. It's not a problem that it's supposed to be solved. Okay. Rabbeini Shmuel ben Tibon said that the Chachmei, he says that when he says Chachmei Mechker, he means Aristotle and his students. Chibris Sforim b'Midas Adam. They wrote many books about what's known as Midas Adam, okay, or character traits or virtues, and long truths. They wrote long books about them. Why did they write this? So they wrote long books. He's referring to the ethics mostly. I don't know how many other books do this, to explain how people can, habituate themselves with virtues until they become part of their soul. They become, right, sometimes called second nature. And in the same way, how someone who was bad character traits can fix them. And now, since these Goyim wrote these great books that help us doing this, but, right, sadly, and this is what he means to say, but sadly, there isn't any Jewish books doing this. Therefore, the Yidden with bad midas are stuck with their bad midas because they don't read Greek or Arabic. And even if they do, they think that it's bad, then you shouldn't learn midas from a Goy and so on. They read about the Nida in the beginning of Prerequesits. And therefore, they stay with their bad midas. And the Rambam didn't want the Yidden to stay with their bad midas. He decided to do this akdama of these chapters in the beginning of this Pesachtas office. Yizker behem bektsura tzorich min anyunim asher rich behem achei amechka k'moi shezacha b'psichasai. This is referring to the Rambam's own psicha, that he will, in short, mention, right? Yizker means like mention the important, needed, the necessary ideas that these philosophers have told us in order to be Mezakas Yisrael, so they shouldn't be missing, right? And that Rambam, it's true. Now, do you understand what he's saying? But he's basically like in the position of someone who read, like, nowadays we have people like this, right? Some guy read a psychology book, and he was like, wait, this basically, this is very different than now, but let's say, I'm making present. Someone nowadays says, read a psychology book, and they says, wait, this basically solves most of the things that the Mashgiach in Yeshiva tries to solve. So it's very sad that the Mashgiach can't read this book because he doesn't read English, or because he holds that it's bad. So what does he do? And I know many people have done this. Takes the book, writes it over, says this is what the Mishnah means somewhere, and he brings 3 psikim and 4 Chassidische Sforim and so on. And now he helped the Yidden because now they could have all these great solutions that the Chachmei HaMechker or outside sources have done, and that's the framing. That's something of the framing of Rabbi Tim. Of course, there's something a little better than that because, like we said, because he isn't just talking about solving problems. He's talking about how to become a good person, which is not the same thing that psychologists are into, right? Psychologists don't teach you how to become a good person. They teach you how to solve problems, again, which is very different. And another way of saying it is that psychology, and that this is what. Actually, I'll make it clearer for you and sharper for you. When nowadays this guy, whatever his name is, you probably there's many of them, who says, look, I have these tools, right? They call them tools. Which I learned from some Chachmei HaMechker, some researcher somewhere, who was ready by now didn't replicate. So it turns out that's not been true. But anyways, assuming that it was true and helpful, he said I learned these methods, and now I want to teach it in yeshiva because it seems to be helpful. Why shouldn't I help the Yidden? And then if someone asks him, or usually asks himself, what do you mean? Don't we have a Torah? The Torah is basically said to be this, right? Just to be clear. If someone says, well, there's some facts about how many miles it takes to go from one side of Africa to the other, that's not necessarily what the Torah is about. Although some people believe that the Torah has to say it also for some reason. It's definitely not what it's about. The Torah is about how to behave. or how to become a good person in some sense. So it's not such a competition. You say, okay, that. But when you're telling about how to start, again, people in yeshiva, they're very worried about how to get kids to have a smuda. Turns out that psychologists figure out there's something called ADHD, and you just have to take Ritalin for it. So that seems to solve its direct competition, right? We had Musa Shmus for this. It used to be. Turns out it's a pill that we need. There's real competition here. Most people don't realize, and now we got very used to it. It's a real competition. The drugs is one way. Where you mean, say we have talk therapy. Same thing. It's a competing program, direct competition. Now, what did they say to people? This drush also heard already. No, what did the answer? What did A.J. Twersky say? He says one of two things. One of the things he claims, but the things that he usually say is like this: of chas v'sholom, the ends, the goals, what is good, how to be a Hashem. We're not taking from psychologists. Of course, the psychologists have their own idea of what a good person is, which they call a normal person. Okay, new idea, not good, normal. Nobody knows. Anyways, and we don't agree with their goals, right? That's why someone goes to a psychologist and says, look, you don't have the same goal as me. My goal is not to ever think of have any sexual thoughts. You probably don't believe in this goal, but you are a very good technician of the human soul, so you must know how to stop having those thoughts, even if according to you they're good, but according to me they're bad, right? This is the justification for what's it called? Whatever, different politic. Now, right? And in other words, the justification for using these outside thoughts is that they're only there as means, not as ends. Right? They're only not chas v'shalom telling us what good is, but they are telling us how to get to the good that we decide. That is the thought that these people say. And okay, maybe they have a point. I'm not here to argue. Of course, it's true that modern psychology can't have, because of it trying to be a science and not a philosophy, it can't tell you what is good by definition. It could only talk about means, which means that it's an evil science. But that's a different discussion. Now, and that's why when you learn it, the problem is that you actually receive this semina. You start thinking that there's no ends, there's no such thing as good, there's only means. And because if you wouldn't have, then you wouldn't have taken that drug that makes you not have sexual thoughts, because that's a bad means, even though okay. Now, if you don't have, it's not important. The important thing is to clarify by this contrast that the Rambam did something much more extreme, right? The Rambam's chiddush here is he doesn't say, look, you all want to have good midas. It's hard to have good midas. It says in the Mishnah somewhere. Let's say it says in the Pusik. By the way, there's no Pusik that says you should have good midas. But let's say there's such a Pusik that says you should have good midas, and all the Yidden are mentioning they have good midas. Look, Aristotle wrote a book. He has some good aitzes. Yeah, aitzes, no problem. Use aitzes, chacham v'goyim tam. Any aitzes is good, as long as it gets us to the goal that we decide. The Rambam doesn't say this. You'll notice, because the Rambam says. The Rambam doesn't believe in this whole distinction between means and ends in this way, right? The means are decided by the ends, and knowing ends is the goal of any real science, anyways. So, what the Rambam does is he says no. He says, I'm going to teach you what your goal should be, what the good life is, and I'm going to teach you from Aristotle what the good life is. So he didn't actually make this excuse where no, I say taking the good life from the Torah. And I'm just telling you how to do it from Aristotle. He actually did something much more radical, which was to say, look, you don't know what a good life is. Of course, he did this move. He said that he identified something like, maybe there's some differences, but he never emphasized those differences, right? Nowadays, people like to look for those differences. But he basically said, what Aristotle thinks a good life is the same thing that we think a good life is. It's the same thing in the Torah. And we went through one stagdum of Peresh HaMishnah, where he talks about En Lak Shbech B'Nem Al Dal Dam Sh'Talocha, and says this is what Aristotle said. But you don't understand it. Most people agree, according to him, this is what the Torah says. But he doesn't think that most people understand what that is. Even and just to be clear, not the goal of what the good life is, and not the details of it. In other words, what it consists of. Like, for example, the idea of L'hargel atzma b'mitzvah toivus. L'hargel atzma b'mitzvah toivus is not something that you would find without the Rambam. You would not find it in any Mishnah. You could read the whole Prerequesits, and many people even read the Rambam and don't realize that it says there. Because they're reading the Rambam according to Prerequesits, not Prerequesits according to the Rambam. Right? If you read the art scroll Perish, basically that's what you'll get. I know that my friend wrote it, but unfortunately they have to write it in a fake way because of that. So he's basically doing a much more bigger chiddush, which is helping the Eden by teaching them what a good life is, what it consists of, and also how to get to it. But that's the smallest part. The bigger part is that, okay? So now you know this already. Do you know that? Did you know this until before now? Yeah. So, no.
We had a sheet about this.
We had a sheet about this a long time ago, about Kal Levens Mishamra, yeah. Okay, so now, what did I want to tell you about this? What I wanted to tell you about this is like this. So the Rambam wants to do this. Now, you'll notice that the Heilige Rambam doesn't say this in the Lakdama. He says over here, in other words, Rabbi Ibn Tibon is giving you a very outside view. He says, look, there's this great way of life called the Nicomachean ethics. Sadly, the Jews don't know about it. Of course, maybe the Prerequesits does mean it, but nobody realized that. So therefore, the Rambam is going to help us somewhat by telling us a little bit. And you'll notice, even he says, Biktzura, Hatzurich, right? There's not like the Rambam is really going to explain you. When you're going to reach Moed Perukim, you have a very small chance of actually understanding what he's trying to tell you. Because, again, do the math. Moed Perukim is how many words we said, 10,000? And then I think it's something like 30,000, 80,000 words. I don't know. It's a much bigger book, right? Obviously.
What does this have to do with Prerequesits?
Wait. Because Prerequesits is about having good midas, according to the Rambam.
But if you read it, I mean, like, I don't know.
Then, he doesn't say anything about having good midas?
No, I don't know. I'm not sure. Does it sound like what the Rambam is talking about?
Of course. According to the Rambam. You have to read also the Rambam's Akdama and also the Rambam's Perish on Prerequesits. Then you'll see how it talks about what he's talking about. The important thing, what I'm making you notice over here, and I wrote it in my little comment over here in the bottom already, that Rabbi Ibn Tibon is presenting it very explicitly this way. Both presenting it that way, and both by doing that, he makes you very clearly notice a certain problem. Like I'm saying, the Shemona Perukim is very short, and just to be clear, Artel didn't like to write, at least the books that we have, are not written at length. They don't really explain themselves very well. They're written extremely densely. And it took him, I don't know how many words, again, something like 10 times as many words as it took for the Rambam to explain the so-called summary. And the Rambam himself used summaries of ancient ethical ideas, and he shortened even those. So there's both a big, long, like sort of broken telephone game, and extreme shortening of the ideas. What the Rambam is saying, and what Rabbi Tibon is saying, something like, okay, of course, you can't expect most people to really understand what we're talking about, but we're going to give them really some 2-3 important ideas that are enough to move forward based on, something like that. Right? You will notice that the Rambam never said this. The Rambam never said that the reason he writes this is to save the Eden from, to help the Eden who never didn't read Aristotle. The Rambam says that he wrote it because, you remember the Akdama, there was 25 classes on it. No, not 25. But the Rambam said that he wrote the Akdama because Prerequesits is very important. It teaches you how to become a Novi. And many people don't understand it, although it seems simple. This is the Rambam, very important language to remember here. Okay, and you can go to page 14, 15, 16. It says, I've told in page 15. It says, I want to. What's this Masechta seems self-explanatory. Kal Levin, it seems also simple. It seems easy. Like you said, you read Prerequesits, you think you know what it's about, but that's not true. Twice it's not true. Number one, and I'm on page 16 now. Number one, doing it is not easy for many people, for most people, for all people, depending on how you translate this word. It's not easy to do it. Okay? In other words, now, this is another important comment that you should already know how to read this, right? The Rambam says, Prerequesits needs a perish because it's hard to do it. Does that make sense? Doesn't make sense. Exactly. If the problem is that it's hard to do, how is your drusha going to help me? You have to solve how the hardness of doing it, right? And probably the reason why it's not easy to do is because we have bad midas. The same problem, right? It's hard to be a person who is kosher lichos v'noyach l'ritzois because I'm a person that's kosher lichos v'noyach. That's basically why, right? Or you could say because I'm used to it, because that's my midah. That's all basically the same thing. Why is it hard for me to be that person? Because I am that person. So what's your solution? You're going to be a perish. I understand exactly what it says. I just don't know how to do it. Right? Obviously, the Rambam thinks there's an answer to this question. Right? The Rambam thinks that his explanation is going to somewhat help. Might not entirely help, you'll still might need some actions, but it's going to help. Very important thing to notice. It's going to help. We did do this when we read the Akdama. And it's going to help because of the theory of practical wisdom. That has to be the answer.
It gives you the before and the after, right?
What's before and after?
I'm saying the idea of it here is just to tell you how to go about what's being described and also what it's for, right?
No, a lot more than that. I'm going to give you this sheet today, but first I'm getting into it. It's going to help because at least some of, okay, I'm going to make minimal claim, at least some of the reason you don't stop having the kas is because you don't understand what kas is or how any of it works. And since human beings are things that work on knowledge, on some kind of knowledge, we're not actually mechanical things. This almost everyone agrees, even if philosophically, even if scientifically, I said it last week, even if scientifically you think that's the case, we definitely still don't work that way. So if you want to make someone do something, or if you want to make yourself doing something, it's very, we did this last week, exactly. It's very important to have and this is Aristotle's language, you need to see the goal you're aiming towards. And his analogy is if you're an archer, if you're trying to shoot arrows, and just like, well, what's the correct way to shoot it? Well, exactly to the goal, to the target. Okay, but if I don't see the target, I need this like seeing of the target to even to know which way to aim, both to know where to aim and to actually fix my aim. I need to be looking at the target and referring to that, and then I'm aiming backwards and trying to get my aim better. Of course, there's more to aiming than knowing the target, but that's a necessary thing. And the same way, if you don't understand what the target is that you're aiming for, since human beings are the kind of things who live in some kind of thought, in like some kind of story, where like this is what I'm trying to get to, and that this is not something that you can see with your eyes, it's something you can only see in some kind of wisdom, then you're going to have that wisdom in order to even be able to make any progress towards it. Otherwise, you're going to be like pushing things or working in the dark. It's going to be very hard. It's like, and the Rambam seems to think that if you don't have the basic structure, and maybe for this it's enough to have the like very basic structure that he gives you in Shemaya Perukim, although I know so many people that have read the Shemaya Perukim that didn't even get that most basic structure, so I don't know. But in any case, if you would have that basic structure, you will have a much easier time getting there. Okay? That's one thing. V'gam, besides for that, some of them, like calling them evunim, I think that simply means most of Pirkei is self-explanatory. Some of them it's not. Like some Mishnayos just don't know how to attach them or what they're talking about and so on. But it's very important because it brings you a great perfection and a true success or true happiness. Okay, very important words also for our purposes. Right? Why should you want to do these actions? Because they bring you perfection and happiness. It's translated here, Atzlucha is the Tibonian translation for what's usually nowadays translated in English as happiness. So that's why we already discussed that. That's why you have to do that. So the Rambam didn't say, you see that it might be the same thing, but he didn't say that I am telling you this, I'm going to tell you this because, look, Aristotle wrote this great book, Pirkei is a little worse book, but we could sort of make Pirkei mean what Aristotle made, so I'm going to help you by doing it. He's just telling you the thing itself. He's saying, this is a book, Pirkei starts with the other way around. Pirkei is a book that can bring you true happiness and true perfection, but most people don't understand it, and definitely don't know how to do it, which is partially because I'm not understanding. Therefore, I'm going to explain it to you, and I'll give you these prefatory chapters in order to explain it. And then he says, by the way, you should know that I didn't make any of this up. Some of it is from non-kosher sources, but it's still okay. You see the difference between the Rambam Zakdam and the Ibn Tim Zakdam, right? The Rambam Zakdam makes a she'd want to read the book, and the Ibn Tim Zakdam makes you not want to read it. Which means that if Ibn Tim had the same purpose as the Rambam, he was doing a very bad job. Because his preface literally makes people not want to read it. Although, of course, and he's talking to people who do have the same view, right?
Well,
you understand what I'm saying?
No, what's the difference?
If Tibbon was targeting the same audience,
yeah,
right? Then he wouldn't say on the cover, "Hey, this is a book that's basically repivoting the direction of Pirkei Avos in according to a whole different agenda. It's reprogramming it, right?"
Right.
And definitely wouldn't say, "Look, you people Nebuch don't read Greek, so you don't know how to be good people." but thankfully I'm going to teach it to you, right?
And the Rambam.
The Rambam doesn't say that.
Right.
What he says is, you have this book called Prerequesits. Everyone wants to be a good Yid according to Prerequesits. You just don't know how, Nebuch. So I'll help you. And I'll help you become a Novi. The Rambam is actually doing a good job, even if his purpose, you see, even if his purpose would have been the same, and it's hard to show here how it's different. It sort of is the same purpose, but he's speaking it in a way that actually works. But Ibn Tibben's way is speaking it in a way that actually...
He's not maching avek Prerequesits.
The Ibn Tibben is not either. It's just maching avek the Eden. Not Prerequesits specifically, right? Not exactly. But he's not. If that would be his goal, it would be a very bad job. But the answer is, of course, that his context actually was this way. And one of the big things that motivates him in this work, and the reason he wrote the translation was because of this. He realized Ibn Tibben translated Prerequesits. His father translated already before that. They translated these works because they were interested in wisdom. And this was their closest, their easiest. They thought, there's already a Jewish book that tells it to us, therefore we'll translate it first. But actually, they also went on to translate a bunch of non-Jewish books also in the same way. And because the Chachmei Doinel, the people that he was writing for, actually did want to learn, they felt this like, how do you call it? They felt bad relative to the universities in their neighborhood who were much more advanced than them. And they were trying to catch up. This was explicit. This is not something that I made up, and this is exactly why the Rambam, Ibn Tibben and his fans made a big fight against the Rambam happen, because he said this explicitly, and then people understood that this is threatening to them. But the Rambam never framed it in this way because he was actually caring about the thing itself. He wasn't caring to be less. The Rambam, he does say things like this sometimes. The Rambam, like, according to your interpretation of the Torah, that should have said, Rak am novel v'tipish agaya katan hazeh, or something like that. But the Rambam never frames his worry, his like motivating factor as like, why are we so behind and the Goyim are so advanced. Ibn Tibben does explicitly frame it this way, and this is a problem. At least if your goal is to make people better, it's a problem. If your goal is to be as smart as the Goyim, then it's not a problem. Anyways, why am I saying all of this? This is all for us to at least get into our head how difficult what the Rambam is doing here is, and how difficult it is for us to figure out what's going on. Why? Because it's besides for how hard it would be even for the Goyim and just read Aristotle and these stuff and understand what they're saying. There's all the difficulties in that. There's also this huge difficulty in this. This is all to explain what I started with, where there's, besides for like being 1,500 years between Aristotle and the Rambam, there's also a very long process and very long, like, to understand. In other words, to retrace. When we have this, we read Shemona Prukim, and the real reason we're reading is just because if we would just be reading ethics, nobody would come to my shir. And it seems to me important to figure out how these connections happened, how they actually were connected. And I'm not one of the people that believes that the Rambam's connection was fake. I think that he's right, at least partially, in discovering that this is what the Chum. But of course, the people that wrote Prerequesits also did a very bad job at explaining themselves. Not only the Rambam. Aristotle also relatively, to us maybe, did a bad job explaining himself, but a lot better job because of this like big thing where, like I said, the Socratic tradition figured out how to expose their starting points in a much greater way than any other tradition ever did. But we'll get to this in a second. Let me first finish what I was saying before. So if you want to understand Shemona Prukim, what you have to understand is that this book is some kind of, and by the way, most good Jewish books, okay? The bad books are not even this. But the good Jewish books, like all of the Rambam's books, like all of the Kabbalah's books for the most part, are all something like this. There is like, if you want to like give the historical story, you'll say like something, there was Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle, who opened up this like school of thousands of questions. Almost every question that till today we didn't find many new questions. We have new answers, but the questions are still the same. I was even reading someone talking about Aristotle's book on the heavens, the Salo, and they said it's basically about cosmology and how many heavens there are and how much and so on. And nowadays most people think that all of it is nonsense, but what people also think is that we're still asked, the questions that he has are basically the same questions. Things like, is the universe infinite or not? Or like very basic questions. and gets into better. He actually is very good at dividing the questions even more. And they're mostly the same questions that the modern cosmology asks, just that they have different questions, different methods of answering them, and so on. But they're the same questions. Basically, all scientific questions and all philosophical questions were invented by these people. Or they came to us, but they didn't invent them. They were existed since Udamanish much. But they organized them and were still in that tradition. And then there were specific answers chosen by them, of course, or specific directions of inquiry that they went in. And then what happened later? You know what happened, right?
Turned it into a problem?
No, actually, some people did always. But then just, okay, do you want to have a very short version of the history so we understand the problem that I have here? Okay, this thing is happening in something like the 3rd century BC, right? Remember Aristotle's dates?
396.
There you go, that's when, Berech?
Regarding Judaism?
Yeah.
That's...
A little bit after Yirmiyahu Novi, right? They learned from Yirmiyahu Novi, stimmt?
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
True. Of course, there is actually earlier sources for, if the Greeks thought that their wisdom is from the Egyptians and from the Babylonians, that's how it gets to Yirmiyahu, but that's a different discussion. But this framing of questions was not, there is actually one book in Tanakh, which is a book of questions, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not entirely true that the Greeks invented questioning. The ancient Near Eastern sages, of whom we know of Iev and his friends, but there were probably others. And there's even others mentioned in Tanakh, right? And even Moshe Rabbeinu was very interested in their wisdom. This is why I think that Ram wasn't crazy for thinking that the Torah is just really just a philosophy book. Because Moshe Rabbeinu, like we said, wrote 3 books, as talked about the Shal Shidas. One is called Sefer Shal Moshe, Chumash. Another one is called Sefer Shal Bilam. Okay, Parshas Balak, or maybe something else. And the third one is called Iev. And if you think about it, from the Tanakh, and Chacham always think like their whole world is basically Tanakh. And if you think about it, in Tanakh, there is 2 kinds of wisdoms. There's Moshe's wisdom, and there is Eastern wisdom. And Eastern wisdom, Sefer Mishlei, is basically that. Some of it is literally, it says on it, and it's copied. It was copied from them. And same thing with other, what's called the wisdom literature in Tanakh, which belongs to this wisdom literature, Near Eastern and some possibly Egyptian wisdom literature, which is agreed, not the Tanakh didn't invent it. We know for other sources of it. The Greeks also, Plato has a priest in one of his books telling Socrates, do you know that you Greeks are very young? You don't know anything yet. We have 1,000 years of tradition to teach you. And this is like the people that have the amen of his story are really talking about that tradition. But in any case, so there is a tradition of questions and even dialogue, like Eve, which is a dialogue, and it's not clear if it ever answered its question. Even the same, people think that it's a problem of evil. There's not a problem, it's a question of evil. See the difference? And it's maybe Eve was you realize that if it would be a problem, nobody would write down the problem, right? We solve the problem. Let's just say, the Sefer Eve is this dialogue, and then in the end God comes and says something, nobody knows what, but supposedly, if it should have still be the one that solved the problem, so we should have cut out the rest of the book. If it would be a Frimeid, you would just have that part, right? And if he left the questions, that's another way of saying, no, the questions are still there. Maybe God actually, the real thing that God says in the end of Eve is that I have even more questions for you. You think you're a Kodesh? I was like, yeah, you read Eve, right? I was like, for Eve, you think you're a Kodesh, you have questions. I have 55 questions for you. How about you start working on those? Sean, people think that is mean to say, hey, you don't know nothing. No, I have a lot of questions. Take them seriously. You found one good question, no problem. There's a lot more questions. A lot more things to find out. You have got what to do with your life. Anyways, where am I at? Okay, so there's this, but in reality, the Greeks taught us how to question. Let's be real. Even if there were sources for it, even if Sefer Eve does this, we can read it because we have just because of writing and because of Plato writing so well and being able to open up questions in a way that nobody else was able to. Some people later in his tradition, but basically even till this day, then almost nobody surpassed them. This is one of the Rayas of Torah and Hashemayim. Anyways, so. Why are you laughing at me? You should come to my practice year. Later was a revelation in dialectic. Now, I'm not the one. If you read the Rambam believed it, like basically you have to understand. He couldn't have not believed it. If you read his books and you compare them to everything else, you see that it's like that. So now And this is like just to open the questions, right? And then there's specific interpretations of them. And now for example, now you go, and since we started off with 300-400 BC, that basically means the beginning, what we call, right? Then we have what we call the Hellenistic age, in which all of the Chazal, what we call Chazal, Prerequesits, right? Prerequesits starts Moshe till Rebbe Sinai, and then skips fast forward all the way to the Hellenistic time, right? Within 4 Mishnayos, 2 Mishnayos, within the first second Mishnayos, we jumped from Moshe to Alexander the Great, right? Shimon HaTzadik supposedly met Alexander, right? According to the story, we jumped. That's what Prerequesits does. Okay, there was this ancient story until Aristotle came and his student Alexander. Remember, he was a student. He was a tutor, and Nesura le'Anshei Knesset Agdol, and Anshei Knesset Agdol l'Shnei Knesset Agdol. Okay, Anshei Knesset Agdol is this Persian period that we don't know enough about, and then jump to Shimon HaTzadik, Mashiach Knesset Agdol, which is starting to. And if you actually compare the Prerequesits kind of ethics to what we have from the ancient Greeks, you'll see that they're concerned with the same things. I don't think this is a crazy interpretation that the Rambam thought of. The Rambam has a very particular interpretation, according to a very particular interpretation of the ethics and so on. But in general, the kind of framings that the Chachamim do are very similar to the kind of framings that the Greeks do in the same period and so on. And if anyone tells you otherwise, they're saying shtissim. It doesn't mean that they were philosophers. It doesn't mean that they were able to write a Platonic dialogue or a Aristotelian treatise or something like that. But it does mean that something of the basic categories of thought is what's behind almost all, and it's also what's the difference between the Tanakh and them in a very large way. And of course, the big thing that we're talking about, which is the tradition of questions, the Talmud is that. Of course, one of the worst things that the Rambam did is that he ruined that, right? He didn't ruin it for Shkafa, for Amuna, but he did ruin it for Halacha. Because the Rambam thought that Talmud was supposed to be a law book of answers. Yeah. It's not the Rambam, it's the tradition. It's the Muslims that are shil. It's Muhammad's fault. But in any case, the Rambam, and then Tosfos, he realized that I'm not getting into so many things. But the point is, the Talmud, our Chachamim have also a tradition of inquiry. It's the same kind of weirdness. Just it's a lot less explicit and it's written a lot shorter. It's very hard to understand what they're arguing about. But at least you can see that they're arguing. It's very similar to Sefri. If they're arguing, nobody knows what their argument is. But they're definitely having an argument. They're not, and it's not even clear that they're looking to resolve their arguments, right? Maybe lahalacha, we have to do something because we can only do one of the two options in this world. But they seem to be very happy with the fact that there's an argument, and they write down the arguments, and they don't like cut out the things that were the questions, right?
Ninth grade Rebbe about what Teiko is instead of the Gemara telling you.
Yeah. Okay, so that's something that happens. Now, just to be clear, that's one complex story that I don't think anyone to this day has figured it out. People laugh at people. I have one of my friends that say the Rambam is not like Chazal. That's nonsense. Nobody knows what Chazal is. Anyone that tells you is lying. Nobody knows what Chumash is, for sure not, but we don't know what Chazal is either.
In what sense?
In terms of what the hell they're talking about.
Oh, okay.
I could read their words, I could more or less decipher what it means. I have articles. You know, articles is the biggest kfira, I wanted to tell you. I read Gemara with articles because I'm lazy. But articles are Pekarsis. Why is that? He's bigger Pekarsis than the Rambam, of course. The Rambam just said, look, maybe Talmud, he didn't believe in Talmud in the sense of law. But in the give and take, he's like, just tell us the halacha. Why are you wasting my time? I didn't know what to do. But the Rambam at least didn't do the Pekarsis that the article did, which is to say that there's no such a thing as a Shveir Gemara. Did you notice? I wanted, why am I saying such shtissim today? There's a story that goes like this. I have a problem. I don't talk with enough people the whole week, so all the things that I have. So there's a story that there's a mass about Mendelssohn's beer and the Torah. It's not true, but there's a mass that goes like this: that someone said that it's a Pekarsis. Why? Because in the Masechet Sanhedrin it says, and then of course, just lest you think that our Chachamim were Tmimim and they believed in the Mishnah. What do you mean? We just told you, if you ask this question, you're not Pekarsis. No, a whole lot of Gemara. How do you know? And obviously, if there would be one answer, okay, this is what the Mishnah meant, Maila. There's 17 answers. I don't know how, some number like that. Right? Which means everyone says the other one, you're saying shtis, and that's not what it means, right? Become on, please. Seriously, that you know how to read a puzik. Stanish days, right? That's not what it means. Right? So basically, they're having an argument, and in other words, until this day, we don't know if Chismas Natoida after you learn this Al Gemura, because there's so many options, and we don't know if even one of them is correct, right? So, in any case, I'm just showing finish the Gemara. It's like not like the Gemara was like, not we are afraid of the Sugya because Shalaf Epikars. But the important thing is, then, so this Chacham said, I'm just using this. So Chacham said, so he said if you look in the Pashtunim and the Rishonim, like the Kasha was like, okay, you're just saying Al Pi Pshat, so what's wrong? The Rasha also said Al Pi Pshat. He says Rasha might have decided that half of the people in that Gemara were wrong and the Pshat is different, but at least 1 or 2 times he did say, he has one Mikar for somewhere that's the Pshat, that Chesem Ma'is Minatayr. But you'll see here, he chose always the other Pshat. So he's not a Pekoris, because there's no Pusik, in other words, it's like this question, could you have the Pshat of the Pusik? Could you have only the Pshat, or do you have to have some drushes? And then there's the argument, and then people are mad at people at Mendelssohn for writing the Pshat only. Because some of, like we have the Mishnah of Chesem Ma'is Minatayr, this Mishnah is basically saying, I know that it doesn't say in the Torah, right? If it would have said in the Torah, it wouldn't have had such a Mishnah, right? So, you have to know how to find the questions behind the answers, right? So, he's saying, but in any case, since the Mishnah is saying that you do, in order for whatever Elam Haba to work, you have to have Chesem Ma'is Minatayr, so you have to have it somewhere. So you can't go entirely of Pshat. You can go 90% of Pshat, but you have to have one of them. But these people, these modern people, they try to be consistent. So if you're consistent, then you never have that. So then you're Pekaris. That's the Torah that someone said. And ich sage also, ich sage Lefide, Archkel is not Pekaris. Why? Because there's a lot of Mefarshim, okay? A lot of Mefarshim that think that many Gemuras are problems that were solved instead of questions that we asked. Okay. But each one of them, if you read Rashi, one of the most beautiful things about Rashi, but even not only every single Mefarish. Sometimes Rashi comes and says, I have no idea what this says. I need that. Right? That shows you that firstly it shows you that he was a human being and didn't know everything, but also shows you that he was an honest human being, that he didn't just make up a pshat, because Rashi was creative enough. He could have made up a pshat for everyone, I need that. There's all kinds of people that do that all the time. If you don't know it, I don't know what this word means. Just say something. It's so hard. Look in the next Mefarish, you'll see he just said something. But Rashi is like, no. Now you could ask. The other time it seems that you also just said something. Okay, but then it made sense to him, and whatever the criteria for him of making sense didn't work here. He says, I don't know. And then even in Gemara, sometimes Rashi says, this Gemara I don't understand. And I'm sure if you learn other Mefarshim, there's many Gemaras that they say, this Gemara doesn't add up, doesn't work. But our school, everything works. Did you notice? There's not one Gemara that they write, listen, read, dear reader, nobody understands this Gemara. It's a problem, it's a question. So, it's true that I'm making the analogy from that Torah, it's true that every Mefarish has a different Gemara that doesn't understand. But our school, the Abakars, they're malakit, every one where they do understand. Turns out there's not one Gemara that's fair. So we're never learning anything. They mamish covered up the whole thing. Everything is finished, everything is smooth. So therefore, our school is the opposite of Talmud. And it's mamish. Anyways, where am I about this? So that's Gemara. And then, we're going back in my history lesson. Then you have, after Chazal, whatever, there's a whole another 500-year period that nobody knows what happened. But in any case, this is true. Nobody knows. If someone else didn't know, they're lying. So,
by the Goyim,
yeah, Goyim already we know, but before that, whatever, yeah. Hanikra Savarim, what's Savarim? Savarim is just a word for something that we don't know. Nobody even knows what it means, the word. I mean, the word. In any case, and then we have Rishonim. Okay, Rishonim is where we start knowing something called medieval people, about the year 1000 in the Christian calendar. That's when we start knowing Jewish history, and Jewish intellectual history. We start more or less knowing what people are talking about. Now, and then, of course, in the same time we have, this is the Jewish side of the story. In the same 1,000 years that we just discussed, you have the non-Jewish side of the story, which is something like there were Aristotelian and Platonic academies in Athens, which lasted until something same as a Talmud, Berech the same time, 3rd or 4th centuries. We have, then we had, how do you call it? And these people, most of what they were doing was interpreting Socrates, the Shloishe Gedolah, the Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle. That was their text, just like we're doing Mishnah. And they came up with many interpretations. Some of them good, some of them bad. Nowadays we have a lot more. There's a project called the Aristotelian Commentators Project, which is like printing a whole bookshelf of ancient commentators to Aristotle and Plato that nobody used to read ever. but they're a big important part of the intellectual history that we have now. And the Rambam gives some of this history in Perikei Aleph and in Nevarchim. Like sort of the last stage of this is the Alexandrian schools, which might have operated a little later, and then at some point it still continues, and then at some point you get at some point being in the 7th and 8th centuries, you get the Muslim conquests of all these places, and some of the Muslims, for whatever reason, decided that it's good for them to also read the books. So they read all these books, and you get so in all this period, so then, of course, we have Christianity becoming important and somewhere in between these two people. And we have this, like, he also got a lot of turning things into solutions, like turning, one of the very bad things that were done in late ancient times was something called lexicographies, which is lists of opinions of the great philosophers. So you get like a list that says Aristotle believed this, Plato believed that, blah 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 blah. And that's the opposite of philosophy. But the Muslims and people like the Rambam read a lot of such things, a lot of such. If you read Saudi, they read a lot of such summaries, and then they started like thinking. So what do we believe? But a lot of this work was like, and another thing, another part of this later stage after Christianity became popular. There's a lot of things that I'm skipping, but after Christianity and Islam became popular, a lot of this happened also in making these traditions talk to each other. Now, like I'm saying, this act of making talk to each other is not really a chiddush. People think that it's a chiddush. In other words, like the first Muslim philosopher, and then whoever the first Jewish philosopher was, and then whoever the first Christian philosopher. That's more or less the order. There's some of the backwards order also. Was like, oh, there's this tradition of inquiry called Greek philosophy. There's this like tradition of revelation, new word, called the Bible or the Quran. And now we have to see how they work to each other. The problem is that this is a recreation of a conversation. It's not really like the first time that these things met. Like I told you, it's not even clear that the Bible itself isn't already kind of philosophy. We don't know because we weren't there. They didn't expose that part to us. Moshe Rabbani mostly wrote down the answers instead of the questions. That's when he wrote Eve, right? That was his pen name. When he wrote under his own name, he just wrote the answers, what he should do. But then he had like a side quest at night. He would write Eve, where it was the question that he didn't know the answers. Well, this is like a Gemara Bracha. That's it. Moshe Rabbani didn't know Tzadik V'Rali, right? I didn't make it up. This Tirush. But in general, we don't read those texts in that register, and therefore much later people started to make them talk to each other, and then you had these all kind of syntheses that were developed. And then you got things like people like the Rambam, which are already like the culmination of a certain kind of synthesis like that, and then they get back into fights with people that are not up to date and didn't read them, and all of that. So this is all just for some of the complexity. And now you have, in order to understand what he's even saying, you need to know at least three things. We need to understand what is he saying. In other words, to reverse engineer from his words to what he's saying, we need to know what the questions here are. What are the sigyas b'chlal? Most people who read Rambam, the only question they have is one an apikoides if they don't believe in certain things? How many tyrants can we get from the Rambam to be an apikoides? That's what most people do for the Rambam. Or like, how smart can we think of ourselves, and how much can we lord over the dumb charedim who are dumb? That's basically what most people are doing with the Rambam. Now, not only now, for the last 300-400 years, or maybe even more. But that's not what the Rambam was doing, and that's definitely not the questions that the source of his sources were worried about. They were worried about real questions. So we have to understand that. Then you have to understand how those big questions were framed into certain ways of relating to like something that you can make into a political program, or something that you can make into a religious program. And of course, religions are philosophical political programs that worked out, right? That's what the definition of religion. Plato had all these fantasies of how he's going to create a state. Never worked out. The one that worked out is called Christianity. Right? And maybe Judaism and Islam and these orders that we have, which are basically some dream of what the good life is, or what people should be, and made them. Of course, in order for that to work, you have to stabilize it. You can't leave it so many questions open. Maybe only in yeshiva, but not outside, and whatever. And then that's what we have. And then we have the question of how to how to teach this or how to talk about this. And then, so we have to know that. And then you have to know, like, I think this is less important, but you have to know how limited people like the Rambam are when they're writing a book which can't really be a philosophy book, can't really explain itself, could only masquerade as a Perush and Pirkei, and try to teach the people that are coming to his Pirek sheet, like his Mishnah sheet, a little bit of the correct ways of thinking. And it's going to be summaries of summaries. And it literally is summaries of summaries. And we could try to figure out from what he organized, what he finds important, like what are the points that he finds, and probably just like me, just like when I give my class, and which the points that I harp on are the ones that I find to be in the most in conflict with what people think. That's also what the Rambam is doing. You have to notice, and besides for the 3 chapters in the end that are officially about conflicts, also all the other chapters are really about conflicts, or what leads to those conflicts, or what makes him right in those conflicts. That doesn't mean that there isn't a whole other world which there isn't a conflict of, that we might be in conflict with. So we have a 4th complexity. And this is besides like the other whole side thing, which is to like check if the Rambam Pshat in the Mishnah is a good Pshat, from this least important thing to do. But it is important. And in order to do this correctly, you have to know the whole literature of that millennium and a half, more or less. Or maybe at least that, and also you have to understand their ideas, which is as hard or the same problem. And then you could read the text. And this is what everyone's going to do until next week. And if you'll come back, and then I'll tell you that you passed Shine.